Within the first 2 seasons of Rick and Morty, or as the Greeks like to call it, Rick and Morty, it was established that Rick was so powerful that he had the ability to save or destroy entire worlds as he pleased. Now in the hands of a hero, that amount of power would seem much less terrifying, but in the case of Rick Sanchez, he's no hero. In fact, after thinking back on the series and looking over the Mad Genius's character design, it seems more like he's the opposite. Rick was no more than a villain who never actually tried to hide his corruption from the viewers. While it may seem like Rick was meant to be one of the 2 main protagonists on the show, it turns out that Morty may have been working alongside his own worst enemy the entire time. In fact, the creators of the show often hinted at Rick's dark side, with a character in the series even referring to the old man as the devil. But it wasn't just like any character. Ironically enough, it was the devil himself that said it. The scene came from the episode Something Wicked This Way Comes, and while Summer was talking to the actual devil, he tells her, I mean seriously, I may be the devil, but your grandpa is the devil. And at first, that may have seemed like a really clever joke or pun made by the devil about someone he had just had an argument with, which is what happened in the episode. But there's a good chance that the man was referring to Rick and his wicked ways, making him a monster that is equivalent to what people refer to as the devil. In other words, Rick was never supposed to be the good guy in the series, and he was rarely shown even trying to be one. Instead, he always let his genius be corrupted by the amount of power that he knew he had. And that was the power to manipulate, control, and restructure entire societies to get his way, and if that didn't work, he could always just destroy the world, and trust me, there's more on that soon. But let's be honest here. Rick was never really a law-abiding citizen. No. Rick was a known lawbreaker, and he himself even claimed to have many enemies because of it. According to him, everywhere that there are people with heads up their butts, someone wants a piece of him. He even claimed that there were a lot of beings in the universe that considered his genius a threat. His list included galactic terrorists, a few subgalactic dictators, and last but not least, most of the entire intergalactic government. Now, just because he had enemies doesn't necessarily mean that he was a lawbreaker. However, the fact that he was arrested in the Season 2 finale for an unnamed crime certainly implies that he was. In fact, in that final scene of Episode 2, when one of the other incarcerated aliens asked Rick what he was in for, Rick responded by saying, everything, which tells us that there's no end to the extent of his criminal record, which is actually concerning. He's worse than Thanos, I think. Even the lovable bird person apparently got wrapped up in Rick's criminal past, as he told Beth at his wedding that he and Rick walked a road that was soaked deeply with the blood of both friends and enemies, which tells us 2 things. 1. Rick wasn't afraid to exploit a life debt, which Bird Person believed he owed him, even if it meant putting Bird Person and his other friends in harm's way. And 2. Rick wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty and spill blood as he saw necessary. But interestingly enough though, it was actually at Bird Person's wedding that Rick was arrested, after Bird Person's fiancée revealed that she worked for the Galactic Federation. She claimed that she wooed her feathered fiancé to get close enough to Rick to have him arrested. And remember, Rick was imprisoned for supposedly everything, which most likely includes the fact that he didn't just break laws throughout his history, but he would break down entire realities. That's right, Rick was basically just a god of destruction that was hiding inside the body of a human, although there's not much difference. In fact, some fans even speculated that the showrunners hinted that he was a god of destruction in the intro for the show. Because you see, during the intro of Rick and Morty, fans are shown scenes that have appeared randomly throughout the series, but one that always stuck out was the shot right before the title screen appears. In the shot, you can see Rick and Morty being chased by a Cthulhu-inspired monster, and for the longest time, 6 seasons to be specific, fans could not figure out where in the show Cthulhu appeared. This led many to speculate that the image of Cthulhu was actually meant to symbolize the idea that Rick was ahead of the monster in terms of destructive power. Now, for those who don't know, Cthulhu is essentially an otherworldly godlike beast of destruction that was created by the great horror writer H.P. Lovecraft, and that's why many fans have made the comparison of Rick being a god of destruction, because in the intro he was shown outrunning one. That being said though, a Cthulhu-like monster did make a brief appearance in Season 6, Episode 6, Der Rick Sick Mort. They really are stretching it with these play on words, but it's also hard not to speculate that the creators had something much bigger in mind when coming up with that intro shot. On top of that, Rick's corruption was shown to make him a destructive being in the past, especially in the episode Rick Potion number 9. In the episode, Morty used a potion that was designed to make a single girl fall in love with him. However, through a horrifying turn of events, the potion became a viral infection that quickly spread all around the world. Well, you know what they say, love is infectious. Now, Rick did attempt to clean up the mess that he'd made. Well, sort of. In the end, all he did was turn everyone on Earth, aside from Morty and himself, into crazy mutants. And instead of continuing to fix the problem, Rick decided that he would just find another reality with the same exact parameters as the one they just destroyed. Sounds very similar to Thanos. Rick and Morty then showed up and assumed the identity of their counterparts on that Earth who had just blown themselves up. The entire thing clearly affected Morty mentally, but Rick seemed like it was just another Tuesday to him, implying that he'd done this before. This lines up with the idea that he was nothing more than a god of destruction whose corruption affected everyone around him. Now, in case you still weren't sure if Rick was truly as destructive as his past made him out to be, then you probably don't remember what happened in the very first scene of the series. In the cold open that started it all, Rick literally blew up his and Morty's original planet. Now, it may not have been shown explicitly on screen, but it was heavily implied that the reality that Rick and Morty were in during that first scene was about to implode. On top of that, throughout the rest of the show, there have been hints that they weren't in their original reality throughout the remainder of the first episode, all because of Rick's corruption and his lazy attitude. You see, during that opening scene, Rick is shown drunk and attempting to destroy the planet with bombs in order to start fresh, and while the only voice of reason in Rick's life, Morty, managed to convince him to stop with his plan, the elderly alcoholic passed out before he could actually stop the explosion, and then boom, we get shot right into the intro of Rick and Morty, and the episode continues in its usual manner. But they never actually explain whether or not Rick or Morty stopped the world from being destroyed. Many fans believe that they didn't though, and long before the Rick Potion 9 episode, the duo ended up in an entirely new reality. As you may know, throughout the series, the Rick that has been around since the beginning of Rick and Morty has been the version of him that originated on Earth C-137. And well, there's a chance that Earth C-137, or as normal people would pronounce it, Earth C-137, was the Earth that Rick drunkenly nuked in that very first cold open. But before the pair died, Morty somehow managed to use Rick's portal gun to bring them to an alternate universe that was nearly identical to theirs. And believe it or not, there's actually proof that Rick corruptedly destroyed their original planet only a few episodes after that cold open. The first glance actually came when fans got a first-hand look into some of Rick's memories. In them, you can clearly see that Rick had a memory of being around Morty as a baby, but that math doesn't quite add up when you remember that Rick left Beth and was out of her life for nearly 20 years before returning. So if he was gone for 20 years and clearly knows Morty as a teenager, then there's no chance that he could have known Morty when he was a baby. At least not in that universe. You see, that could have been one of the differences between Earth C-137 and the new Earth that Morty brought to them. In that universe, Rick left Beth for 20 years, but in their original reality, that wasn't the case, so Rick would still have the memories of their time together. In other words, Rick's corruption may have even robbed himself of the good life that he may have once had. Now, Rick jumping from dimension to dimension would also explain why Rick doesn't know what dimension his family is from, which was shown in the episode Morty Night Run. In the episode, Rick dropped Morty's father, Jerry, off at a daycare full of other Jerrys from alternate universes. Not only was that one of the funniest episodes in the entire series, but in the episode it also revealed that Rick didn't know what universe his Jerry was from, and that implies that he hadn't kept track of the universe he was in, because you see, when Rick was dropping Jerry off at the daycare, he filled out a form, and if you look closely you'll see that he had to write the dimension that he was from, as well as the dimension that Jerry was from. And well, for Rick's dimension he wrote C-137, but for Jerry's he wrote NA, as if he couldn't remember which universe he was in. And if Rick was truly the corrupt mastermind that some fans suspect him to be, then that means he's destroyed and moved from so many universes that he's lost track of the one that they were on. So do you think that Rick was actually a corrupt and destructive godlike being that would rather jump to a new universe rather than fix his own problems? Or is that just looking too deep into a great and hilarious character? Make sure you let me know in the comments below.